Hi all, I have another amazingly interesting, notable game to show you today, this time of a British Grandmaster, Julian Michael Hodgson, sometimes known as Jules. Julian Michael Hodgson was awarded the IM title in 1983, the GM title in 1988. He was British champion in 1991, 1992, 1999 and 2000. In tournaments, he was second at the London Lloyds Bank Open in 1986, first at the Geneva Open 1988, and second at Tel Aviv 1988. Just to let you know, I played in some of these Lloyds Bank Open Masters tournaments, and they were really, really strong. You had loads of 2500s coming from USSR, the old USSR untitled, but really strong. Loads of Grandmasters from all around the world came to the Lloyds Bank Masters, so to come even second in that tournament is absolutely amazing. Also, multiple times British champion, but he did so in style. He played with great effect the Trompowsky Variation, and here is an example of him playing the Trompowsky against another very strong Grandmaster, Mark Hebden. So he's playing white. Julian Hodgson playing white plays d4, and Hebden plays knight f6, and we have this move bishop g5, the Trompowsky, and in particular after knight e4 usually the bishop goes to f4 h4, but we have what's known as the Raptor Variation, as in raptor like bird of prey. I'll check it out with wiki. Also, some of you might know from Jurassic World, Velociraptor is a certain type of dinosaur which was depicted as being a kind of pack dinosaur, and so raptor anyway, bird of prey. So why would this variation be called bird of prey? Interesting. It's nice, I think, when openings are related to animals, and animals that have certain particular survival characteristics, usually involving food and surviving by eating basically other animals. So here, okay, the Raptor Variation h4. Let's see, black played now d5, and now we see knight d2 challenging this knight. Quite often bishop f5 is played here. Not too many games in live book. This is, relatively uncharted territories. Territory, this position. Knight takes g5, 53 games basically. Bishop f5, 45 games. So here we have knight takes g5, which opens up the h file. I have actually played this with some success occasionally. I have this game against Bagri, which I might show you at some point, but white gets this, quite a bit of dynamic play on that h file. He's given up the dark square bishop, so sometimes he's going to be weaker on these dark squares if black can really make use of his dark square bishop later and try and break down white's center. Here now, black immediately challenges white with e5, hitting g5, and forcing white to do something really, because I think knight f3, there might be the move e4 here. That's very useful. And this could be extremely crushing if the knight moves, say, somewhere, and then e3. This could be very embarrassing and a quick loss for white. So white's got to be careful. He takes on e5, accepting he's got double pawns here now. Queen takes g5. We have knight f3, queen d8. And the game becomes exceptionally fascinating from a certain perspective that I want to spell out very, very shortly. Black's put his queen back, and look at the rook and bishop. They haven't moved yet. We've seen this move e4, challenging the d5 pawn. Black doesn't want to weaken his light squares further. That looks very comfortable on the light squares. He plays actually knight c6. And from this point in, it's as though black isn't given much scope for any creative moves. And the reason I say that, if you look at all of white's moves from this point in, it's like they all seem to carry a threat every single time virtually. There's a threat or subtle threat that needs to be parried. So it's, I don't know, it's analogous to backgammon where one of your counters is kept putting back on the box, so you need to get it back on the table first. So it's like that. It's like the chess equivalent of that. Every single move now, it seems black has to be concerned about a threat from white here. And in particular, I don't really know the full cause of this, except look at the rook and bishop. They're not going to do much here. E takes d5. Okay, black has to respond to that. Now bishop c4. Black has to respond to this, obviously. And maybe this was the time to consider a radical retreat to d7. I know this looks really silly, but White is threatening something like knight g5 here, but this variation potentially, well, queen e2 for knight g5, but with queen g4, black might have found some respite here. This is a respite variation before we look at the game, carry on looking at the game, where even though it is quite dangerous, this position, there's tactics here, this position would have been fine for black. If we look at the game from this point in now, in the game, queen c5 was played. There's a slight problem with this approach now. The queen is subject to potential tempo gaining. We have queen e2, and immediately knight e4 is actually quite dangerous. So black has to do something. It seems every single move from here, black has to do something about potential threats now. Yeah, the queen's sensitivity is also part of this problem. Bishop f5, knight b3 hitting the queen, queen e7, and now white castles queenside, which cuts off black from castling queenside. And it's difficult to imagine, you know, black getting time now to play g6, because actually there's a threat now. Knight fd4 is threatened. Looking at this bishop is also subject to harassment. So black has to deal with that threat now. So he puts the bishop back. And note, these two pieces haven't moved. So essentially a small slip up from black. But remember, in this uncharted territory, improvisations against very, very strong, dangerous, resourceful players could result in real disasters on a scale off the charts. Because basically you've improvised an opening. And here it's like the rook and bishop have not moved yet. Black has basically given targets for tempo gain and harassment, and it's not over yet. White now plays again very forcefully, limiting black's scope for any creativity. e6. We have f takes e6. If bishop takes e6, knight bd4. This is unpleasant. This position for black. It's really just unpleasant. It's probably like absolutely losing. In fact, there's just too much pressure on black's position here. These pieces are just stuck, basically. So we have f takes e6, and white really doesn't let black have any breathing space now. Black's not going to castle queenside. No, the dream is shattered. Rook takes d7, king takes d7, bishop b5, threats now, bishop takes c6, and knight e5. Black tries to do his best to deal with this, but look now, his rook and bishop really still haven't moved. White's got all his pieces mobilized, no bad piece or anything. He's got this aggressive pin, which he puts more pressure on the c6 knight with, knight bd4. Very, very unpleasant. Yes, it's a very unpleasant position indeed. Rook d8 was played. Bishop takes c6. Takes. White wins his exchange back. And basically still, yeah, the king has lost all casting rights. The rook and bishop still standing there, not moving yet. But queen b5. White is threatening now things like knight e5. Black has to try and parry this. Check, and queen d6, trying to defend these light squares. But now, instead of knight e5, we see that is, I think, a good move as well. Knight g5, threatening knight f7. Again, black not given any chance. He's only playing with his queen and king at the moment, in any case. He has to deal with all these threats all the time in this game. Queen d7. White is keeping the queens on. Check. Queen takes a7. Threats now, rook e1 needs to be dealt with. There's really no time to play something like g6. We have h6 being played. Check. King f6. Check. King f7. Queen f3 check. King g8. Again, keeping the threats up. Rook d1. Queen e8. Another threat now in this position. Guess what white plays here? If I give you 5 seconds, how would you keep the pressure on black? Well, it's a double attack as well. Okay, queen g3 looks at not only knight f6 check, but also queen takes c7 is threatened. So queen f7. But now another threat against black. What do you play here with white if I give you 5 seconds? Starting from now. Okay, rook d7, nice deflection. Trying to get this knight f6 check in. Queen f5. And it seems the first time that black's given a chance to do something, but really not much. The knight is secured on e4, but white is actually threatening that pawn. So again, it's not much scope for creativity. The bishop can't move without getting mated on g7 in any case. So black really hasn't been able to move the rook and bishop. He's been swamped with threat after threat after threat in this game. We have c5, and now, okay, a4. But black is really just tied down completely. Is white really gonna? He's just gonna queen his pawn, if nothing else. We have h5. Another point though is not just to queen the pawn. The back row is less vulnerable to back row issues, back row mate issues. We have knight d6 hitting the queen now, and the queen seemingly does a useful pinning move here, counter pinning move. Queen d5. Threatening perhaps queen d1. So is this black's first threat of the game in return? And how is it squashed? It's squashed in style. Can you see what white plays in this position if I give you 5 seconds? Okay, knight e8. Yes, parrying the threat, hitting the queen. And again, if queen takes d7, knight f6, winning the queen. And black just gave up here, basically, because also the knight is hitting g7. So, you know, he resigned here. A move like queen f5. White just has rook takes g7 check here. Just mating. Yes. An unfortunate game. So, actually, black's final move apparently was queen e5. Which obviously gives the queen up. With that, resigns. Queen e5 and resigns. A crushing game in the Raptor variation. One of a string of crushing victories, which are really seriously off the scale for opening type disasters. Because players with black in British Championships were improvising and getting completely smashed in these uncharted territories. You know, the strength of IMs and GMs is often related, you know, to the amount of opening knowledge and patterns of previous games. Julian Hodgson, a fantastically talented, resourceful player, was getting people to improvise, you know, stripping bare their pet lines, pet systems, their knowledge base, STEM games, all of that stripped bare, being playing in this Raptor variation where Julian Hodgson has written a book on Trompowsky, but this Raptor variation is pretty dangerous with h4. Looks a little bit dubious, but you know, against an unprepared player, you know, this is the sort of crushing game example churned out by Julian Hodgson at the time. So yeah, this explains why, you know, he won the British Championship like 4 times. He had these very, very dangerous systems, but a fantastic resourceful player. And from the evidence of this game, it seems he doesn't like to give his opponents any respite, any time to breathe, any scope for creativity. He's providing them with things to worry about at every turn, like in backgammon. It's like the counter being put back. If you've ever played backgammon, it's like not giving them any respite, any scope for doing anything that constructive. Once black did have one threat, it was completely crushed with knight e8. But yeah, the rook and bishop not moving is just shocking from an opening perspective. But this is the sort of thing that happens due to improvisation. Okay, I hope you got something from that. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.